Welcome back to our channel. Today's topic is why American vintage tractors are making a huge comeback. Let's dive in now. The nostalgia factor. American vintage tractors have a magical way of carrying us back to a time when farmland stretched across the horizon and life felt just a bit less complicated. Jokes aside, how many of us remember standing on a bale of hay, watching Grandpa chug along on a big rumbling farmall or John Deere? Those memories, stored in dusty photo albums or shared around the dinner table on holidays, resonate with a special warmth for middle-aged Americans. And guess what? It's not just fuzzy sentiments driving these old machines back into the limelight. There's also pride in resurrecting a piece of genuine U.S. manufacturing history. During the mid-20th century, brands like John Deere, International Harvester, Farmall, Oliver, Minneapolis Moline, Ford, Alice Chalmers, and Bollins helped revolutionize American agriculture. It's easy to forget that these companies had tremendous influence on how the nation fed itself, especially when the next generation's definition of progress sometimes overlooks the mechanical marvels that laid the groundwork. Yet a growing number of enthusiasts are dusting off these classic tractors, giving them fresh paint jobs and rolling them out to shows or parades as a reminder of America's agricultural heritage. It might sound funny to get teary-eyed over a tractor, but these machines often have personal stories. Perhaps the family farm thrived with a Minneapolis Moline G plowing its fields, or maybe your neighbors down the road used a Ford 8N for decades without a single major breakdown. Vintage tractors become entwined in local histories, so their comeback represents more than just a mechanical revival. It's a cultural reawakening. There's a reason people pay good money to transport these iron beasts across state lines, braving flat tires and questionable back roads. They're bringing a piece of their own past, or at least an idealized version of it, back to life. The nostalgia factor also drives a huge sense of community. Attend any antique tractor show in America, and you'll see retirees swapping stories with younger folks, offering advice on how to rebuild a carburetor or chase down the correct shade of paint. These gatherings feel like reunion picnics, where everyone shares a passion for that slow putt-putt sound and the whiff of diesel or gasoline that seems to linger in the air. The older generation takes pride in passing knowledge down to the next wave of hobbyists, ensuring that these tractors remain rolling history lessons instead of fading relics. There's a minor controversy brewing in some circles. Are we over-romanticizing the past? Critics say that modern agricultural machinery has left vintage tractors in the dust in terms of efficiency and safety. But that's precisely the point for many collectors. They're not trying to compete with the horsepower or computing power of new equipment. They're focused on preserving something tangible, a slice of Americana that reminds us how we got here. The push to restore and display these classics isn't about living in the past. It's about preserving the spirit that built so many American farms from the ground up. Mechanical simplicity. One of the biggest draws for American vintage tractors is their mechanical simplicity. These machines hail from a time when electronics were virtually non-existent in farm equipment. Modern tractors, with their sophisticated software, GPS mapping, and intricate sensors, can be intimidating to troubleshoot without specialized tools. By contrast, an older tractor often just needs a decent set of wrenches, a can-do attitude, and maybe a well-thumbed repair manual to get it running smoothly. Take the popular Ford 8N, introduced in the late 1940s. It features a straightforward four-cylinder engine, a relatively simple hydraulic system, and a manual ignition setup. If something breaks, you can often pinpoint the issue by listening to the engine sputter or checking the spark. For many hobbyists, this is part of the romance. They appreciate that these machines, despite being decades old, can still be understood on a purely mechanical level. Mechanical simplicity is also a gateway to learning. Younger enthusiasts who never had shop class in school find a certain joy in pulling off the carburetor, cleaning the jets, and reassembling it without hooking up a diagnostic computer. It's hands-on problem solving, a refreshing break from our digital heavy world. Even if you're middle-aged and grew up with some mechanical experience, tinkering with an Alice Chalmers WD or a Farmall H can offer a whole new dimension of fun and challenge. That said, these older tractors come with caveats. They're less efficient compared to modern equipment. Emissions regulations weren't really a thing in 1950, so if you've ever been caught in the exhaust of a vintage diesel, you know the smell sticks around. Fuel consumption can be higher, and certain parts, like magnetos or specific engine gaskets, might be increasingly rare. Purists love the adventure of hunting for period-correct components, while pragmatists might swap in modern equivalents. Both approaches have their critics. Restoration shops sometimes get flack for using high-end replacements that deviate from original factory specs, but owners might argue it's better than leaving a tractor to rust away. Jokes aside, operating a simpler tractor does have its undeniable charms. You don't need to worry about software glitches or cryptic error codes. If the engine stops, you can usually coax it back to life by checking a handful of mechanical suspects. The sense of accomplishment from solving these problems on your own is huge, especially for people nostalgic about the era when American manufacturing meant solid steel gears, robust construction, and clear-cut engineering. Sure, you might get a little grease on your hands, but that's part of the allure, right? We shouldn't gloss over the drawbacks, though. Most vintage models lack modern safety features, like rollover protection structures, ROPS, or advanced braking systems. Some owners retrofit these improvements while others refuse, citing historical authenticity. It's a tricky debate. Still, for those who respect the machinery's limitations and follow prudent safety practices, the simplicity of these tractors can be a joy. They stand as testament to an era when you could fix mechanical issues with grit and a bit of know-how, rather than an expensive diagnostic rig. Community and clubs. One of the most endearing aspects of vintage tractor culture is the strong sense of community it fosters. Across the nation, you'll find clubs dedicated to preserving, restoring, and celebrating these old American icons. These groups often hold regular meetups, barbecues, and organized rides, where members travel scenic back roads in a convoy of humming old engines. It's like the classic car cruise-in scene, but with more mud and an extra helping of home-cooked chili. Enthusiasts come from all walks of life. Some are seasoned farmers who grew up relying on these machines. Others are city dwellers looking for a mechanical project that connects them to America's agricultural roots. The clubs provide a friendly environment where you can learn everything from basic maintenance to advanced restoration techniques. It's common to see older members patiently teaching newcomers how to tune up a magneto or properly adjust a clutch. This intergenerational bond is a big part of why vintage tractors continue making a comeback. Knowledge that might otherwise be lost is passed down, ensuring these machines stay alive and well. Events hosted by these clubs often feel like county fairs. You'll see tractor parades, kids enjoying rides in wagons towed behind a restored Minneapolis Moline, and maybe even a slow race. Yes, you heard that right, a slow race. The idea is to inch along as slowly as possible without stalling or stopping. It's more challenging and entertaining than you'd think, especially when pride is on the line. Jokes aside, these laid-back competitions encapsulate the spirit of vintage tractor gatherings. It's not about speed or high-stakes drama, it's about camaraderie and having fun. There's a bit of controversy in some clubs, though. A few groups might limit membership to certain brands or require that your tractor be at least a certain age. If you show up with a slightly newer 1970s or 1980s machine, you might find yourself politely nudged to look elsewhere. Then there's the perennial debate about modifications. Should you be allowed to join if your tractor has a modern engine swap or updated paint scheme? Purists can be vocal in their disapproval, while others take a more laid-back, the more the merrier approach. Despite these small rifts, the majority of clubs aim to welcome anyone who shares a genuine love for American tractor heritage. The sense of belonging is powerful. You'll find entire families who treat tractor club events like vacations, often traveling to neighboring states to catch a particularly big show. They set up camp, spend days talking shop, watching demonstrations, and savoring local food. Some clubs also organize charitable drives or scholarship funds, turning their passion into positive community impact. At its heart, the vintage tractor movement is about preserving a slice of Americana, and these clubs keep that slice fresh and ready to share with the next generation. Restoration adventures. For many hobbyists, restoring an American vintage tractor is less about the final result and more about the journey. Imagine towing home a rusted Oliver 70 that's been sitting in a collapsed barn for 40 years. The tires are rotted, the engine is seized, and various critters have made nests in the seat cushions. It might look like junk to some people, but to a dedicated enthusiast, it's a hidden treasure. A chance to bring history roaring back to life with some elbow grease, patience, and a lot of spare parts. Restoration can be time-consuming, expensive, and sometimes downright frustrating. You'll probably run into a few surprises when you tear down the engine. Maybe the cylinders are more pitted than you expected, or a previous owner installed mismatched components. A certain comedic element arises from telling the spouse, "I only need a couple more parts," only to find yourself scouring online auctions for rare shift forks at 3 a.m. Jokes aside, it's all part of the thrill. The satisfaction of hearing that engine sputter and then roar after years of silence is worth every greasy knuckle and late-night search. Controversies abound over what constitutes a proper restoration. Purists insist on original parts only, meaning you'd better hunt for a correct Farmall carburetor instead of a modern generic replacement. Others argue that practicality should trump authenticity, especially if you intend to use the tractor for actual farm tasks. Swapping in a more reliable ignition or upgrading to 12 volts might be frowned upon by strict traditionalists, but it can make a big difference in cold starts and overall performance. Ultimately, each restorer strikes their own balance between historical accuracy and real-world usability. Parts availability can be an adventure in itself. Some American brands produce tractors in large volumes, so you might have an easier time finding components for, say, a Farmall H or a Ford 8N. But if you have a rarer model, you could spend weekends combing salvage yards or traveling to swap meets in hopes of stumbling upon that elusive Governor assembly. There's a detective-like thrill in tracking these parts down, often leading to colorful tales about how you found an original seat cushion bracket buried under piles of scrap metal in somebody's shed 3 states away. When the restoration is complete, you get more than just a showpiece. You hold a resurrected piece of American manufacturing that genuinely works. Many owners proudly drive their vintage tractors in parades, display them at fairs, or use them for practical chores around the homestead. Some even enter tractor pulls to showcase the machine's reborn might. It's a testament to the robust engineering of the era. With dedication and a good set of tools, a hunk of rust can transform into a finely tuned testament to mid-century American ingenuity. Hidden features and innovations. While they might look old-fashioned, American vintage tractors were often cutting-edge for their time. Early hydraulic systems, for instance, revolutionized how implements were lifted, lowered, and angled. It's easy to forget that before hydraulics, farmers had to rely on brute muscle or clunky mechanical linkages to adjust plows and cultivators. Brands like Ford, John Deere, and International Harvester competed to see who could perfect reliable, user-friendly hydraulics, making farm work vastly more efficient. One iconic example is the 3-point hitch setup, famously brought into the limelight by Ford in cooperation with engineer Harry Ferguson. By transferring the pulling force through the tractor's rear axle, this design improved traction and made hitching implements far safer. It was so groundbreaking that modern tractors still use variations of the same principle. Sure, the old systems lacked the precision of today's electronically controlled hydraulics, but they were robust, transformative, and shockingly effective. Certain models also included a belt pulley on the side or back, turning the tractor into a portable power source for stationary equipment like sawmills, water pumps, or threshers. That's right, your granddaddy's tractor was essentially a multi-purpose engine on wheels, making it a farm's all-in-one powerhouse. In an era when multiple specialized engines were expensive, this feature significantly expanded a tractor's value. Who needs separate motors when you have one that can do it all? Of course, not every innovation was a roaring success. Early diesel engines in American tractors had their quirks, sometimes requiring a delicate starting procedure involving glow plugs or a gasoline starting circuit before switching to diesel. While these designs eventually evolved into reliable power plants, some farmers swore off diesel, insisting it was too unreliable compared to good old gasoline. This debate could flare up at the local co-op, with each side presenting anecdotal evidence of either bulletproof diesel longevity or frustrating cold starts. Let's not forget torque amplifiers and power boosters, mechanisms that gave you a momentary gear advantage for tough spots. Farmall famously introduced a torque amplifier that let you downshift on the fly without grinding gears, offering a burst of extra grunt. Such innovations paved the way for the sophisticated transmissions we see today, including power shifts and continuously variable transmissions. Though they might look crude by modern standards, these older systems laid the groundwork for the advanced machinery that now populates America's fields. There's also an underappreciated side effect of these features: cross-compatibility. Some American tractor brands sourced parts from the same suppliers, which occasionally means a carburetor or magneto from one brand might be adapted to fit another. This was a lifesaver in remote farming communities, where the nearest dealership might be hours away. These hidden compatibilities can still help today's restorers, who, after a wild goose chase, discover that a part from an Alice Chalmers could be tweaked to work on an Oliver, or vice versa. It's not always perfect, and purists might roll their eyes, but in a pinch, such flexibility can mean the difference between a fully functioning machine and a stalled project. Eco-friendliness and sustainability debates. In an age where environmental concerns dominate many discussions, vintage tractors pose an interesting dilemma. On one hand, these older machines don't meet modern emission standards. They often burn fuel less efficiently, spewing out more pollutants per hour of operation than a modern tractor. They lack catalytic converters or complex engine management systems that minimize harmful exhaust. If you've ever been enveloped by the plume of a 1950s diesel tractor, you know it's not exactly as clean as a Tesla. However, there's another side to this argument. Manufacturing a brand new tractor consumes a lot of resources: metal, plastic, rare metals for electronics, plus the energy for assembly and transport. By keeping an existing machine in service, enthusiasts argue that they're practicing a form of mechanical recycling. Instead of scrapping an old tractor and expending additional resources to produce a new one, they restore and maintain the existing chassis, engine, and frame. This can be seen as eco-friendly in its own way, particularly if the tractor is only used occasionally or for light chores. There's also the reality that many vintage tractor owners operate on small homesteads, hobby farms, or just bring the machine out for parades and shows. The cumulative hours of operation, and thus total emissions, might be far lower than what a modern commercial fleet puts out daily. For many fans of American iron, the environmental impact is minimal compared to industrial-scale operations that run gargantuan diesel machines nonstop. As a result, most enthusiasts see their hobby as having a relatively minor carbon footprint. Some owners try to offset emissions by using cleaner fuel blends or upgrading the engine's internals. Converting a vintage engine to run on biodiesel is a possibility, though it can entail swapping out hoses, seals, and injectors. Purists argue this deviates from authenticity, but more pragmatic collectors might see it as an acceptable compromise. Then there's the argument that improving your old tractor's tune, keeping it well-maintained and running at peak efficiency, reduces emissions as well, all without straying too far from the original design. Critics remain unconvinced. They point out that any unregulated engine is still polluting the atmosphere at a higher rate than a modern power plant would. They question whether nostalgia is a valid reason to bypass environmental regulations. This sparks spirited debates in forums, clubs, and even among local municipalities, some of which have begun imposing restrictions on emissions or noise levels for tractors used on public roads. But the fact remains that vintage tractors account for a minuscule fraction of total agricultural output these days. For many people, the history they preserve and the sense of connection they cultivate outweigh the environmental downsides. Cultural and media influence. It's not just farmers and mechanics who are fueling the resurgence of American vintage tractors. Pop culture, social media, and television have all played a role in sparking public interest. Numerous TV shows focus on barn finds or restoration challenges, where an old John Deere or Minneapolis Moline is unearthed from decades of neglect. After some sweat and wrenching, it emerges like a phoenix from the ashes. The drama and transformation hook viewers, many of whom might not have cared about tractors at all before stumbling upon these shows. Online platforms amplify this fascination. YouTube channels dedicated to tractor restoration rack up thousands of views, featuring everything from tear-down tutorials to paint jobs that look better than the original factory finish. Influencers post videos showcasing "will it start" moments, fueling excitement with every crank of the engine. Tractor parades go viral with lines of glistening red, green, and yellow machines puttering down small-town main streets. For middle-aged Americans scrolling through social media, this content can spark memories of farm visits or fleeting glimpses of older relatives working the land. Naturally, not all coverage is rosy. Documentaries sometimes highlight accidents or safety concerns, painting older tractors as outdated and dangerous. They point to the absence of rollover protection or highlight stories of untrained operators getting hurt. This can generate controversy, with critics arguing that these portrayals ignore responsible use and overshadow the machine's historical value. Enthusiasts counter that any vehicle, classic car, motorcycle, or tractor, requires proper training and maintenance to be operated safely. Social media can also influence market trends. A single viral post about a lesser-known Alice Chalmers model might spark a wave of interest, driving prices up overnight. Such hype can be a mixed blessing. Collectors who already own that model might celebrate, but newcomers may feel priced out. It's reminiscent of the classic car world where certain models become hot commodities just because they're in vogue. Trends inevitably cycle, but the spotlight on vintage tractors has grown more intense over the past decade, and it shows no signs of fading. Cultural events also help keep these tractors front and center. County fairs, agricultural expos, and local festivals often feature antique tractor displays or pulling contests. This public exposure inspires the next generation, who might otherwise assume farming has always been done with GPS-guided machines. By seeing, hearing, and even riding older American tractors, they gain an appreciation for the history and ingenuity that paved the way for modern agricultural marvels. It fosters a sense of pride and continuity, an awareness that farming didn't just spring from nowhere, but evolved through grit, innovation, and hands-on labor. The future of American vintage tractors. So why exactly are these vintage tractors making such a massive comeback, and what does the road ahead look like? For starters, the blend of nostalgia, mechanical simplicity, collectability, and cultural pride ensures that many folks remain eager to rescue, restore, and celebrate these machines. Rather than fizzling out, interest seems to be building, supported by robust clubs, online communities, and a growing number of shows and events. These tractors stand at the intersection of history and hobby, bridging a gap between high-tech modern farming and the raw hands-on practices of the past. There will always be debates over authenticity versus modernization. Some owners will keep their tractors as period-correct as possible, right down to the original nuts and bolts. Others will retrofit improvements for safety or convenience, adding roll bars, improved hydraulics, or LED lights. Each approach has its champions and critics, but both ensure that these machines remain in working order instead of gathering dust. Every time you see an old Farmall or Oliver puttering through a parade or pulling a wagon in a Christmas festival, you're watching a piece of American history continue its journey. From an investment standpoint, many collectors believe these tractors have a solid future. The key is that they are more than just old machines. They are symbols of an era, of American craftsmanship, and of the sweat and determination that fed the country through wars, recessions, and booms. As long as people value that story, and, let's be honest, Americans love a good story, these tractors will retain a special place in the national consciousness. In practical terms, some homesteaders and small-scale farmers still find them perfectly adequate for chores like plowing small plots, hauling logs, or mowing fields. The sturdy frames and mechanical reliability of these tractors can rival modern equipment when it comes to basic tasks. They might guzzle more gas or diesel, but they offer something intangible, a deeper connection to the work and to the land itself. Operating a 70-year-old tractor can be both practical and poetic, reminding us that progress can be measured in more ways than just efficiency metrics. I hope you found this video both entertaining and informative. Subscribe if you haven't already, ring that notification bell, and check out our channel merch to show your love for American vintage tractors. We'd love to hear your tractor tales. Maybe you grew up riding on a metal fender with the wind in your hair, or you've got restoration stories filled with unexpected twists. Share them in the comments, and let's keep these American classics running strong for generations to come.